Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sackur. My guest today is an Irish writer whose intense lyrical novels have won him awards, acclaim, and, most importantly, millions of readers around the world. Colm Toibin isn't so much a flamboyant storyteller, he's more an acute observer of character and the deepest human feelings. There are recurring themes in his work: loss, mourning, exile, which might suggest a dark, brooding presence. But how close is that to the real Colm Toibin? Colm Toibin, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Your writing is deeply rooted in Ireland, and yet you spend much of your life now travelling the world. You teach in America, you've homes in Europe. Does it help or hinder you that you now have quite a lot of distance between you and your homeland?
I think I live in my mind and in my memory, and something can trigger a memory very easily. Then I come in and out of Ireland, so I see it. There's a really funny thing that happens if you arrive at JFK in the Irish sector. In other words, you're getting the flight to Dublin, and you suddenly see the Irish. And of course, so many of us are living in America. People are going home maybe for the first time in a year. And there's that funny sense of belonging in two countries or belonging in midair, and people getting really comfortable with the air hostesses of Irish accents and meeting each other. And then, of course, you arrive in Ireland and you realise, I could leave. If I could get out of here tomorrow morning, you know.
But when you join that line at JFK Airport in New York and you're in the Irish section, as you put it, do you feel your heart soaring or sinking?
I feel I'm home. I feel I can recognise every gesture, every half tone in a conversation. Something, I can see a couple coming towards me and I can really tell you where they're from. So there's that absolute sense of full recognition.
So you're as utterly Irish today as you ever were in that sense?
Yes, if someone spoke in a Northern accent, a Dublin accent, a Wexford accent, I would know immediately what the accents were.
Yeah, Fintan O'Toole, another great Irish writer and commentator, he says emigration and exile, the journeys to and from home, are the very heartbeat of Irish culture. Do you feel that?
Yes, that for 150 years, it's been the secret history of the country, that every generation, every family lost 2 or 3 people to emigration in each generation. So if you went to America or Australia, you often never came home. And then if you went to England, then you did come home, but suddenly your children had English accents, but their cousins had Irish accents. And it was always that, so that even in the difficult years between Ireland and England, the families were very connected. And the big difference, of course, was that if you went to America, you could become anybody. You could become a millionaire. Your descendants could become president, as we know with the Kennedys. But in England, of course, you couldn't become queen. I mean, there was legislation really to prevent you.
So you were always not an easy thing to do. That's true.
So America was glamour, and England was work.
I just wonder whether, in your experience, and maybe for yourself too, when you are an Irish person abroad, you tend to romanticise and look very fondly back at the homeland. But maybe when you go back, once again, you remember the frustrations and the difficulties and some of the parochial aspects of Irish life. Would that be true of you?
Well, I teach a course at Columbia University on Irish literature. And of course, the literature is so gloomy. It's so filled with death and melancholy and houses burning. And I mean, one day one of the students said to me, you know, I've been in this Ireland of yours and it's very nice. People are really friendly, but all this literature is so filled.
So it's the opposite of what I said.
Yes, the literature is so filled with darkness. And if you're studying the literature with students and you're offering a sort of background, you are looking at a sort of darkened Ireland. It's not an ideal. No writer, I think, has idealised Ireland. It's often the opposite, where people find the darkest things within the country and dramatise them.
You bring me to your own writing, because when we talk dark and melancholy, I mean, there are elements of those qualities in a lot of your work. And I for our audience who don't know your personal story, I want to relate that to your own upbringing in Ireland. I mean, you suffered great loss as a child. Your father died, I think, when you were 12. And I wonder whether, I mean, it's easy, in a sense, to assume that coloured a lot of your personality
loss and mourning figure in your work a lot, and clearly as a child losing your dad, that marked you forever.
Yes, I think in those years, especially in the 1950s and maybe the years before, it was the silence that affected you more than the event itself. People had no idea how to handle a
How
child.
to talk about it.
How to handle a child. Just thought, oh, they'll be okay, they'll go back to school. They'll just, children get over things quickly. They bounce back. Well, they don't, actually. I think nowadays we know that. We have counsellors, we have all those systems in place. At that time, there was nothing. So I became interested, I suppose, in the poetics of silence, in what silence does, in the word not said, the door left closed, the sense of something that can never be mentioned again. And that, of course, in fiction, you can really work with that because you can show the reader what the person is thinking. And then you can show the reader what the person is saying and the big distance between the two. So the reader gets to know this world where a lot of things must be kept within.
And maybe the most obvious and best maybe example of that in your work is the most recent novel you've written, Nora Webster, which I think you invite us all to see very much as in part autobiographical, because it's really built around a woman who has lost her husband, just as your mother lost her husband, and also built around the relationship between the woman and the son, who frankly sounds very much like you. Is it autobiographical?
Yes. I started the book in 2000, and what I'd been thinking about was trying to describe those years in a provincial town with this family where their father dies and the houses are empty. There's a palpable absence. No one knows what to do about it. It's not a ghost. It's just no one is there where there was somebody. And of course, if you write that from the child's point of view, I think you could get one short story. One sad Irish short story, A Boy is Sad, and we know those stories. But I couldn't think how to do it until I realised, of course, I watched my mother so carefully in those years after my father died. I can remember everything she said. I can remember what she was wearing, individual clothes, the things she had. And of course, I could tell it from her point of view. Because I was watching her so closely, I have a sense of what her point of view was. And so I began to work on...
But it's so intimate and at times raw. I mean, for example, this is a woman who, as her husband was dying, the fictional Nora Webster, she sends her youngest boys off to live with an aunt, and she doesn't contact them for months on end. She just leaves them.
Yes, my mother did that. And it was, it was in Ireland.
Are you angry with your
No,
mother?
I'm not angry, but it was in Ireland before the telephone was widely used by people who didn't have much money. She really needed to be with my father. He wanted her. And so we were sent to a safe place, and where we were perfectly safe, of course, but we just didn't know. We never knew what was going on. And I think it affected myself and my brother very deeply. And of course, when I became the novelist, of course, so I'm the one who could dramatise it and describe it and try and see it from her point of view rather than from ours. But then slowly you do see it from the boy's point of view. And so, but the novel was not an act of revenge in any way. I was not angry by that time. I don't think I was ever angry, really, but I wanted to use it. I was exploiting it. I was getting that material, saying, oh, I know where I can put it here, to try and get the story right, to try and make it emotionally accurate.
You pick away at emotions, and they develop and they change slowly. And it makes me think, because of the density of the way you write, you must be quite an introspective, maybe even quite a melancholy person. Am I right? Or is that a silly way of using the author's work as a means into the author's character?
I think there are two ways of looking at it. One is that, on a personal basis, I think it's very bad manners to go around the place being melancholy. Even Hamlet got fed up doing it, and he started to be funny at certain points of the play. I went to a psychiatrist once and said, look, I'd love to integrate the fact that when I go out at night, I'm really cheerful and I'm really enjoying things. Yeah. And this other part of me, as you say, this brooding guy that writes these melancholy books. And the psychiatrist said, which would you like to be? I said, I don't know. He said, go away. That in other words, I think it's quite normal for someone who's very funny in print to be very sad when you meet them. The sad clown, we sort of know that one. But I think the other case is also true. You find that someone who writes really sad... Virginia Woolf is a good example. She wrote quite melancholy stuff about, death and time and all those things. It isn't as though her novels are funny, but personally, people said she was absolutely hilarious. She one day said T.S. Eliot came around wearing a four-piece suit. And, she made jokes about people she knew, and she was outrageously funny. And I'm interested in that idea, that, that you almost, the private self and the public self often just don't connect.
Is this not just about Colm Toibin, but also about Ireland? You've said something that strikes me as fascinating about the importance often in human exchanges actually being in the silences. Do you think Ireland has long been a country of repressed feeling, of silences, rather than things said explicitly?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think there's a great deal of talk in Ireland. You can find people who are constantly telling one another stories and things. But you realise, I mean, I certainly realised after my father died, but I've watched it happening since, of people suddenly being so entertaining at a time when they're thinking all about something else. While inwards, something was eating them away. And I think that is in the society.
There's a lot of death in your books. There isn't so much sex.
Well, there's quite a lot of sex in some of the short stories. It's very explicit, and it was fun writing it. But I really must write more sex as time goes on. I'm becoming more relaxed about those things.
Well, so let's talk. Here's a precursor to writing about it a lot then. Let's talk about it a bit. I think even as a young man, as a child growing into an adult, you knew that you were homosexual, but you didn't, obviously in the Ireland of the time, you couldn't be public about that. I mean, it wasn't decriminalised. Homosexuality wasn't decriminalised until, I think, was it 1993?
93, yes.
So I'm just wondering, for example, at school, because you went to a school, and we'll talk a bit about it, where it was run by the priests and sexuality wasn't an open topic. How did you cope with your growing awareness of who you were?
Well, I think I internalized it. I mean, I think like a lot of gay men, the closet actually is quite a comfortable place. It's dark and there's no one else there. And so you just keep that part of yourself utterly compartmentalized. But obviously when I went to university, I mean, there were people there who, I mean, I had a group of friends, all of whom knew. And so that was very comfortable. And when I went to Spain...
Your mother didn't know?
No, I didn't go home. I didn't take the story home. And that was quite a common thing to do in Ireland. Your friends knew, some of your family knew, but not all of your family. And then gradually, people would realise, or someone would tell somebody else. But that big coming out moment didn't happen in my generation in Ireland in the same way as it did in the United States, for example.
But going back to your senior school, which I think was St. Peter's, wasn't it, Wexford, we now know, I mean, I guess you didn't know, or maybe you weren't fully aware at the time, that it was a place where a number of senior clerics, priests, were serially sexually abusing some of the boys in the school. Again, I wonder whether you subconsciously were in any way aware that that was going on.
No, it was unimaginable that priests who later went to jail, who the full details were even published in the local newspapers, are precisely what they did.
And it was systematic,
and it was systematic,
long-term.
and it was long-term.
And you knew these guys.
And I knew these priests, and I liked some of them immensely. So for all of us, it was really difficult to read this material all these years later, to realise I was there. Right, I know exactly when he says he went up that stairs to that room. Oh, I know that room. And
you really didn't know anything? Nothing ever happened to you?
The idea that priests would take their clothes off, or want things sexually from a boy was, I mean, the most bizarre idea. I mean, the idea of adults and children in any sphere was something I had never heard about.
You've written about it very interestingly since, very honestly, and I think at one point you tried to get inside the minds of the priests, and you said in a way, if we assumed they weren't homosexual but were heterosexual, and we assumed for a minute that they were in a school full of young girls aged between sort of 12 and 20, we wouldn't be surprised if from time to time they expressed desires and fell from the standards that we expected from them. In a way, people were shocked by that because it almost felt like you were trying to find excuses for these abusive priests?
Well, I was trying to think about things from their point of view. I was just trying. The whole society moved from loving priests and listening to them and paying attention to them to hating them and thinking that they should be all, they were all the same. And I don't like when that happens. I mean, I just find that, a society moving so quickly from one thing to another, like mob rule. So I started to think about it, and you see, the school also had a seminary attached to it. So I got to know a lot of the seminarians. A lot of boys went in at 17 or 18 to become priests who were homosexual. And one of the reasons they went in was that if you're gay, when you're about 15 or 16, a part of you becomes much more internalized. You move inwards, and that can hit a spiritual space. And for a lot of the priests, nothing happened until they were in their 40s. In other words, they went through 20 years with the celibacy, with obeying all the rules, and something broke in them in their 40s, some loneliness, and also the sexuality, if it has to be kept silent and can't be mentioned, can become really twisted over those 20 years. People can move from being sort of normal gay people to actually having all sorts of things, which including getting pleasure from power.
Well, power's the thing in the end, isn't it?
Yes,
I mean, we've had the sex scandal, we've had other scandals, including what happened to the babies of unwed mothers, some of whom ended up dead because of mistreatment. Terrible scandals. And what has resulted from this is a fundamental sort of undermining of the power of the Catholic Church in Ireland. Is that, in your view, irrevocable, and is it a positive?
Yeah, the Church has lost its moral authority, and it won't get it back. And the only way it can move is into the spiritual realm. If it continues to try and rule things in the civil space, for example, trying to continue owning schools and hospitals, trying to continue to tell people how to vote in referenda, this won't help them in any way. The only way they can work is if they return to talking about prayer and the Spirit and actually God and the Bible and things that matter to Catholics.
You were brought up as an observant Catholic.
Yes.
You know all the dogma, you know all the practice.
I do.
Is there a spiritual element to you still, despite everything you've experienced?
You see, I think there's a spiritual element to all of us that just appears in various ways. It's very hard if you're listening to Bach on a Sunday morning early. They're not getting something from it which is much more than the pleasure of the melody, as though some soaring thing in the music hits something that you need. I wonder if all of us don't have a need for something beyond the material. But for me, it certainly wouldn't be Catholic dogma.
Well,
but
I guess
would
any
be.
of us who've read Testament of Mary would understand that, because this short novel you wrote, it's fascinating, but for a Catholic it's very challenging, because what you do is you get inside the head of Mary herself and you write about her view of what happened before, during and after the crucifixion. And in essence, the message of Mary is that a lot of the story was a lie. She wasn't there to cradle him as he died and to wash his body. She was then told to say she was. She was told to lie by the disciples who were creating a global religion. It's a view that many Catholics have found very difficult to take.
American Catholics seemed most disturbed about it. I mean, I was interested in her as a mother, as to what she would feel when her son was to be crucified, and his supporters seemed to think this was a good thing and would redeem the world. When they tell her about redeem the world, she becomes very intelligent and sharp. Said, the world, the whole world. And they said yes, and she just in the end says, well, I was there, because she was there for the crucifixion in my book. I was there, and I can tell you something, it wasn't worth it.
Well, she was there, but she left. She ran away.
Yes, I was there and I ran away.
Yeah.
But for her, the suffering.
But you see, this is what, when I read it, what I have in my mind is a message about all religious dogma, all quote-unquote fundamentalists who use experience for their own ends and try to sort of create an overarching dogma. Was that in your head too? Was it a critique of, for example, maybe not just Catholicism, but Islam today?
Yes, I would have been really alert to the idea of the individual sacrifice within terrorism, say, especially the suicide bomber, or in Ireland, say, the hunger striker. That individual figure being chosen by the group to die, and how that would be viewed by someone who loved that person and who was flesh and blood with that person, such as the person's mother. So I was thinking about the relationship between the personal and the communal, the big cause versus the small the small family relationship. So I was trying to work that out using her voice in the book and trying to follow her voice. In other words, I didn't begin with a big dogma of my own. I just every day would work on her voice and see where it took me.
Are there some things about religion that you wouldn't say? I mean, I'm thinking now about the area of freedom of expression and censorship after satanic verses, after Charlie Hebdo, after a whole range of different incidents. Have you thought carefully about whether you, in all circumstances, believe that an artist should say whatever they like about any religious belief?
Yes, I do, but I also think that I think you have to take into account that in Europe at the moment, Muslims are under great pressure within certain countries such as Holland or France, and that goading them, for example, is not a particularly brilliant thing to do.
That sounds a bit like what Peter Carey said when he refused to go to the Penn Awards.
Yes, but at the same time, once murder is involved, once you start going into the offices of magazines, people who make drawings and people who write cartoons, and you murder them, I think we're in a different realm there. I mean, I think you can have an argument with Charlie Hebdo about their content, but once they're murdered, the only argument you want to have is actually is with the people who murdered them, to say to them that this is not acceptable in Europe, and we will not tolerate it. If you want to have an argument with us about anything, there are so many methods to do so. So I would be very, once the murders happened, I'm in a different space, I think, than everybody else. I'm absolutely on the side of Charlie Hebdo once the murders happen.
Well, I want to end by coming back to Ireland and another campaign that you've been vocal about, and you've referred to it already in passing, that is the referendum on gay marriage. You adamantly, passionately support the idea that Ireland should legalise gay marriage, but there is already civil partnership law. Obviously homosexuality has been legal in Ireland for many years now. Does Ireland really need this, do you think? Is it going to change Ireland, or has Ireland already become a liberal West European society?
We want equality, and nobody says to someone else getting married, oh, civil partnership will do for you. The Irish Constitution, Article 41, is very strong about the protection married people have, or a family has, under the Constitution. And civil partnership doesn't give us that. But in any case, we wanted equality. But
don't you feel equal already?
Well, I'm excluded from getting married. Now, coupling, I mean, how you couple, how you make your love public, and how you have a ritual surrounding that is fundamental to all of us. I mean, I'm not suggesting everyone must get married, but to be told you can't in a country where ritual is really important is quite an exclusion, actually. And what was wonderful was that because this is in the Irish Constitution, there had to be a plebiscite, a full referendum in the country. And of course, one government minister came out as gay, one ex-minister came out as gay, one major journalist came out as gay within the campaign. So it was quite an exciting time. You wondered, who's next? Is the Pope going to come out as gay? But the arguments, it was a very decent campaign. The arguments were pretty clear, and nobody really insulted anybody else. And it meant that we, as gay people in Ireland, could put our case to the nation, could say, this is who we are, this is what we want. We want to be included. We don't want to do damage to anyone. We don't want to stop marriage. We want to embrace marriage.
A final thought. We've talked a lot about Ireland in terms of your fiction and also your personal life. And Ireland, in the course of your lifetime, has changed a very great deal. Do you feel much happier, much more comfortable in the Ireland of today as opposed to the Ireland of your childhood?
It's a much easier, but it's always been an easy sort of, people have very good manners, they're very careful. But now, for example, there's no problem of publishing a book which would deal with difficult matters in Ireland. Even with my Testament of Mary book, which was on as a play as well, in Ireland there was no difficulty at all. People are absolutely ready to accept dissent and difference. So that's been an enormous change in Ireland. Obviously, there are times when I'd like things to change back a bit. I don't like Sunday shopping. I wish Sunday everything was closed and you could just stay home and read a book. But you can't have everything.
Colm Toibin, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.